Hi readers, it's Lori and this is Books, Ink, and Paper, and today we're going to talk about my BookTube prize reads for the quarterfinals round. Now, if you're not familiar with the BookTube prize, this is created and planned and executed by Robert Sheard, who is the person who is on BookTube and on the BookTube Prize channel. And I really appreciate this contest or this judging opportunity. I do follow the women's fiction and nonfiction prizes. I follow the Booker Prize. Now and again, I follow a number of other bookish prizes too. But for the most part, what I love about this one is that it is oftentimes judged by BookTube content creators, but also now it's really open to anyone who has any sort of presence online and wants to read and judge books. Now, judge is a harsh word for some people, but essentially what we're doing is ranking them. The process begins with a list of what I feel like was about 100 books. I have them listed in my Bujo, and our first task as judges was to go through those books, that book list, which was quite extensive, and to mark the top, I think it was 24, maybe it was 48. I don't know, it was a lot that we felt like we would want to read based on whether we had read them and enjoyed them, or whether or not we would read them based on the synopsis. So the first round is just basic. Does this look like a good read for you and one that you would enjoy? I'm happy to say that when I got to the quarterfinals as a judge, all 6 of the books that I had to read, was assigned to read, were books that I had chosen in that first round. So I was quite pleased by that. And I'm going to share with you at the end another kind of surprise outcome of this process. What happens is he assigns a larger number at first, and then they curate down, and then they curate down. Next round is the semifinals, and then of course the last 6 then will be judged in the finals, which results in one BookTube prize winner for both fiction and nonfiction categories. And both categories are delivered the same way. You can always approach Robert when the season opens at the first part of the year to become a judge. You don't have to do anything except fill out a Google form, and he's always looking for new judges. You choose whether you want to judge fiction or nonfiction, and off you go. It's very, very easy. For me, I had one of these books that was already on my radar, which I had purchased on Libro.fm last year. Then I purchased 3 others on my Libro.fm account because I had some credits. I borrowed one from the library and I purchased one. So that's how I processed my ability to have access to these books. But many of them were available to me at my library, so I probably could have saved those credits and just acquired them in that way. And the semifinals are currently happening. Those judges have just begun on June 1st, and they will complete at the end of July their next 6 reads. And then hopefully I will be accepted for a finalist judge, and I will do that in August and September. Here we go. Let's talk about the way I felt about these books in rank order from the 6th to the 1st. That just seems like the best way to approach this, and maybe I can throw in a drum roll at the end. The Wren by Anne Enright was the last book that I read, and it ended up being the 6th book on my list of books that I liked in this round. In fact, this one I purchased because it was a beautiful cover. It had a pretty interesting synopsis to me, and it was not too long, and it was actually on sale when I purchased it. So it felt like a great decision on my part. She won the Booker Prize for a book called The Gathering back in 2007. What's interesting to me is when it says winner of the Booker Prize on the book, if you're not a follower of the Booker Prize, you might think that this book won for the Booker Prize, but it did not. And in fact, if I hadn't needed to read this book for this judging commitment, I would have DNF'd it. absolutely would have DNF'd it. It's about the women in this family, and it is about motherhood. It is about being a daughter. It is about grounding into yourself and into your circumstances. It's about living with a famous grandfather who was a poet, who was not the nicest guy or the best grandfather slash father in the world. And it is about this kind of coming together again, if they can come together in ways that are satisfactory for both of them. Nell is a younger, she's the granddaughter of the poet whose name actually was Phil McDara. So Nell is trying to find her footing in a number of ways, including in relationship to this guy that she's met, who is probably one of the most despicable characters I've read about in a long time. I just really, he must have triggered something from my past because I really disliked him. However, Nell is trying to just kind of come into her own and be at peace with some things. She's also noticing that her grandfather's poetry, while very popular, is, she had no relationship with him. So she's trying to find her own voice as a writer, although she's a ghost blogger for a social media influencer. And she's also trying to sort of find her place with poetry and with her relationship to poetry. Her mother, Carmel McDara, is remembering her experience with her father as very challenging. He left them, her mother and her sister and Carmel. He left them for another woman. He was there's a description of him. Let me see what it says. The magic of her poetry was the kind of magic that makes women in their 90s slip outside for a kiss and then elope, as her mother Terry had done, and some other women after Terry. So this one is about Carmel's journey as the daughter of this very, very famous man who then left the two of girls to take care of their mother, who was terminally ill. Carmel also, her sister was very difficult too, not also an easy character to like or appreciate. And she got pregnant at about 17, as I remember, and then she and Nell tried to navigate the woods of being a single mom and of being connected to this particular man, or disconnected. That's essentially the meat of this book. I just did not find it to be compelling for me to continue to want to find out what happened to them. But I did continue to find out what happened to them because that was one of the rules for the BookTube Prize, is that you have to finish the book. Was it lyrical at times? Yes, absolutely. Was it filled with some verse? Yes, it was. There were poems that were written by their grandfather that were inserted here and there, and I did appreciate them very, very much. That was probably my favorite part. But yeah, this one just didn't have the meat that I really had hoped that it would have. But a lot of people did like this. I actually rated it 2.5 stars, which might be the lowest rating I've given a book in a very long time. So there you go. I know, I feel bad, but it just wasn't for me. Number 5 on my list may shock some of you. It will probably really upset my friend Sarah, who recommended this book to me before it was assigned to me on the BookTube Prize. This is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. The hype around this book probably was a factor in my ability to feel as connected to it as a lot of people that I know do, including my friend. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it. What I'm saying though is I think that that hype is so high that it is now starting to deflate some of the ratings that this book is getting, because people have an expectation that's really been built up for a long period of time. This was a book of the year from a number of sources, including Barnes and Noble. It was talked about so often, so much. It was just really quite the book to write. The buzz about this book was incredible for a long period of time. Still a lot of buzz about this book. I didn't look at a lot of ratings for any of these books or look at what other people thought about these books going into these reads because I really wanted to be impartial and surprised and, just not to know a lot about them. But I did know a little bit about this just from some of the buzz that was occurring before the BookTube Prize selections were made. And it was one that I really wanted to read. I bought this one on Libro.fm and I listened to it mostly, but I did get it from the library as a Kindle title as well. What I loved about this book is the main characters, Moish and Shona. I really liked them as human beings. I really liked their story, their development as characters. Moish creates a nightclub and he brings in people into this little community in New York to enjoy the music that he offers and to get to know each other and to have this really lovely place where people can connect and be with each other. And Shona opens up a grocery store, which, as I recall, was her parents' profession as well. And Shona is a lovely human being who also likes to gather people into this space for them to have support and get to know each other and connect. And also, she doesn't do a very good job of actually charging them for their groceries. She's a sweet saint of a woman who gives away a lot of stuff, including a lot of herself. There are a number of other characters in this book, and I think that combined with the fact that it didn't have the most developed plot was just a surprise to me. I guess I really thought this was going to have a deep story that really, continued. And while there was a story and it did flow underneath the surface of this book the entire time, it wasn't what I would consider a compelling plot, but more of a character study, much of the time, of all of these people that lived in this little community in New York called Chicken Hill, I think. And it was really a story of how they all did sort of weave and connect together, although some of them did not weave and connect together. So there was that. But there was always a relationship, even if some people left the area and moved on to do other things, there was a continuation and a thread. So I think that for that reason, I did understand what the author was going for, and I did, for the most part, enjoy this book. However, there is a character in this book that is so despicable to me that it was really, really hard for me to understand why this author would have chosen this narrative to occur toward the end of the book. It was so heartbreaking. I almost threw the book across the room. I was just that mad at what was happening and what was described at the end of this book. However, it ends up in a way that I was happy with. I cried and I was really satisfied and glad that I read it. I will also say that the synopsis of this book does not describe it in a way that is accurate, in my opinion, to what you will experience in this book. This also leads me to believe that perhaps some people are not liking this book because they're going into it expecting that it is about this and it's really about that. I did, however, give this book 4 stars. So in the end, as I thought about it, it was a 3.5 to 4 for me. So I'm rounding up to 4. Probably a 3.5 on Storygraph, let's just say. I haven't rated any of these so far just because I wanted this video to go out first, and we couldn't release these videos until Robert released who's going on to the next round. But I think it was between a 3.5 and a 4, maybe a 3.75. I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it. I just didn't love it like a lot of people did. The next one that I read was Absolution by Alice McDermott, and I was excited about this one because it was about some wives who were sent to Saigon because their husbands had been deployed there for a particular purpose at the start of the Vietnam War. So in 1963, the setting of this particular novel in Saigon, 2 women meet each other as a result of being sent to this country. One of them is Trisha, who is a newly married woman who's trying to find her footing as a wife and trying to obviously find her footing in Vietnam. And then her friend Charlene. I had to think about it for a second. I have a friend named Charlene, so it took me a minute. Charlene, who has four children and has someone who cares for her children in her home and is quite different than Trisha. She's much more outgoing. She connects the women together. She organizes things. Yeah, she's more outspoken and very bold and has very strong opinions about things. Charlene and Trisha meet because Charlene creates a gathering for these women. And let me just say, one of the reasons why I think I love this book so much is because as an ex-military wife, I did end up in places where we were far from the US and where English was not the language of that community. And so I do feel that isolation that you have and that fear that you have of going to some place you've never been, but also the connections that are made with other women. This is very, very real, and I totally feel for these characters in sort of what their response is to this situation. And I think everybody's response is slightly different. Charlene's response was to get everybody together and then later to mobilize this do-gooding kind of experience in this community. So the person who cares for her children is also a seamstress. She makes some clothes for her daughter's Barbie. The daughter's Barbie is gorgeous. Everybody is stunned by the way that these little clothes fit this little Barbie. And so Charlene ends up contracting with this person who cares for her children to make more Barbie clothes so that they can sell them to the women and other women probably, and then therefore make some money that they can then pass on to the people in Vietnam, orphaned people, families who are living in extreme poverty, people who are at risk, medically challenged, all those things. So Charlene creates this experience where she's going to create this project that she can really get behind. And she enlists Trisha's help so that Trisha will be sort of busy with some things that will help her be distracted from a number of other things that are happening in her life. Later, so it's Trisha's and Charlene's story, but later this other story connects with Charlene's daughter, who reaches out to Trisha after years of being back in the United States and as an adult, having had something happen in her life that was very difficult. And they talk about this experience of this project that her mother felt like she had to create, and the word that's used in the synopsis is inconsequential good. I think that the title of this book and that phrase in and of itself is kind of telling about what will occur as a result of reading this, but I really liked this a lot. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, to be quite honest. I didn't have any anticipated sort of feeling about it. Again, hadn't read any reviews, hadn't read anything by this author, but I really wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy this. It did have a plot. It did have a trajectory. I appreciated it. I wanted more of the daughter's connection with Trisha, I think, a little bit more of that. But otherwise, I really found this book to be quite meaningful for me, and I gave it 4 stars. Oh, and I borrowed that one from the library, actually. And I really have considered whether or not I would reread it again and want a copy of it, but I've determined that I probably could just borrow it again. Then I completely listened to The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This one was the weirdest, quirkiest one, I think, of all of them. And Heaven on Earth Grocery Store had some quirk to it. So did the Wren. But this one took the cake. And why I think I really enjoyed this one as much as I did was because it was also really humorous at times. But it was a dichotomy between this humor and silliness and quirkiness and this really intense experience that you are on with these particular characters. So the Rachel incident is about an incident, but I'm not going to tell you anything about what that incident is because I went in blind. Again, didn't look at a lot of stuff about this. All I wanted to know was who's starting this story and who's still with us at the end. That was it for me, and that's where I stayed. This book is about a young woman whose name is Rachel, obviously, and she is in university but struggling to make some ends meet. So she gets a job at a bookstore and she first meets this man named James. And she and James have a really weird beginning, but it ends up leading them into this incredibly intense friendship that you think will be more, but I will tell you that from the beginning, they become the best of friends. They are then living together, working at the bookstore, eating meals in bed together, watching movies, just your absolute best friends in the world. They're also drinking a lot, partying a lot, enjoying their lives. They're young. What else is there to do, right? Rachel meets this professor because he is her professor at the university where she's attending, and she has a crush on Dr. Fred Byrne, this professor. She's determined to win the affection of Dr. Fred Byrne, as many young college students are. She sets out, though, on a plot to to get Dr. Fred Byrne to notice her. As I remember, she's feeling like he's not really connecting with her in the same way she's connecting with him. So, because she works at the bookstore and because Dr. Fred Byrne has written a couple of really crappy books that haven't sold very well, Rachel concocts this plan to have a book signing for Dr. Fred Byrne's new book at the bookstore. James is all in to support and help her. The owner of the bookstore is very confused because Dr. Fred Byrne is really no one in his eyes, and there aren't a lot of sales of this book, and he had no intention of carrying this title in his stacks. However, Rachel is influential and he agrees to go ahead and let them do this at a very low cost. Dr. Fred Byrne's wife is also confused as to why Rachel would show such an interest in her husband and want to feature this book that is not going to sell more than a handful of copies as the other books that he's written have. And that is the beginning of this novel, in which a multitude of things happen that I cannot tell you about, but I was riveted. I really, really listened to this in a quick period of time. Every morning when I was getting myself ready, which is typically a time where I listen to audiobooks as I put on my makeup and dry my hair and all that stuff, every morning I would look forward to my time with Rachel. I gotta tell you, it was a ride. It was a ride. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always feeling safe, but it was a ride. And I know a lot of you since then, and while I was reading it, said, I really loved this book, and I can see why. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. All right, number two. Number two is, this was hard for me because this was hard. They were very close, these two books. But number two is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. I was so daunted by the size of this book, and I know you know this because I've mentioned it before, but I was struck by, at the beginning of this, just the sheer number of pages that were going to be read by me, and I chose to read this one first because I felt like I just needed to tackle that one first, and then the rest of them would be easy breezy in comparison. But I didn't expect that I would love this story as much as I did. This is an epic novel, historical fiction, written in India from 1900 into the 1940s. A lot happens in the world, and in particular in India at this period of time. But it begins with the story of a young girl who is 12 years old, and her father has just died. Her mother needs to make an arranged marriage occur so that her mother can eat and live in a safe and a home. And so her mother arranges for her to marry a 40-year-old man whose wife died and left him with a young child. So he has an investment in making this marriage happen because he needs help with this child. And in fact, in the first part of their marriage, he's gone for a good bit of the time working. And she is learning how to be a wife and a mother in particular. And her character develops and lingers throughout the connectivity of this book. And I say connectivity because it really did connect people, it connected places, it connected a lot of things that I don't want to mention in the event that you will be spoiled by some of what occurs. This is not an easy read in the sense of the length of it for sure, but also I felt like I just flew through it once I got into it. It took me a little bit to get into it, I will admit. I listened to it and I read the hardcover copy from the library too. I will also say that I found myself more connected to the physical book than I did to the audiobook. And I'm not certain, but I think what it was that the Abraham Verghese narrates this audiobook himself. And while he's a fine narrator, I will say that it didn't feel like it was quite as nuanced in terms of emotion and expression as some narrators that I really love. So I think that was probably why it was fine for me to just read the physical copy and just take it in as I was processing it internally in my own voices that I was assigning to these characters. I will also say that this was one of the first books that I've kept a little bit beyond the deadline date because I needed to finish it, but I made it. I made it in a couple of days after it was due. But yeah, this one was epic. That is what I will say about it. It was epic. So the trajectory of these characters and what happens to them is both heartbreaking and heartwarming. It was very well written, very well paced, and I was so stunned by how much I loved this book. And for a long time, I thought this was going to be number one, but alas, it is number two, and I gave it 5 stars. And then number one, you probably figured this out by now if you've looked at my group, is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This one was the most anticipated for me in 2023. I had it on my Libro.fm account and I just never got to it. And when I saw this one, I was really excited because I did know a little bit about this one from when I researched the reads that were coming out that month last year, but I didn't know any more than was going to be upsetting to me, right? So it was just a sort of an overview of what was going to occur. But I loved this when I saw it first last year because it was set in the Jim Crow South and it was about a little boy who was immediately in the story in the book is incarcerated as a result of getting into a fight with a white boy at the school where he attends. And the white boy's father is very prominent in the community and has a lot of money. And so he, of course, wants justice to be served and he wants Robert to be punished for what he's done. The white boy participated and probably started the fight, as I remember. But Robert is the one who then goes to a boys' work farm that actually also has white boys and black boys there, but they're treated very differently, as you can imagine. This is not a good place. This is not run by good people, and he's really kind of in danger. So his sister Gloria intervenes and tries to find out if they can kind of commute Robert's sentence because it wasn't, it was the other boy started the fight and she was upset. She's upset about her brother. Their mother passed away because she had a terminal illness. Their father is an activist who was in danger of staying in the South because of the work that he was doing. And so he fled to the Midwest. They don't have a lot of contact with him because he's trying to make, he's an activist. He's trying to make equality happen for Black people to be able to vote. And so they are sort of overseen by their godmother, Miss Lottie, who lives nearby, but they live alone because Gloria is determined that she's going to stay in this house that her parents had, and she's going to take really, really good care of Robert and make sure that he has the outcomes that she wants for him, including an education. But then Robert ends up in the reformatory. She reaches out to the NAACP, which is risky. The judge has some compassion for Robert, but he sentences him to 6 months and he's not going to budge that. Robert meets some boys right away and some trouble ensues, and Robert is sort of enticed into doing some things that he doesn't realize are going to get him some harsh treatment. But along the way, Robert has some abilities that are unique, and they are abilities that are both distracting for him in the reformatory, but also that the warden of this community is interested in. And so what happens as a result is magical and is difficult to read and is also heartbreaking at times. And you're fighting for Robert. Some people are fighting for Robert. It's just a great story, and I absolutely loved it. And I can't wait to read more by this author and a number of authors on this list as well. So, The Reformatory, #1, Tananarive Due. I highly recommend this one. What is interesting to me is these 6 books that I chose in that first round, where there were 100 of them, or maybe not quite, all ended up in the BookTube Prize fiction category. And these first top 3 books, The Reformatory, Heaven on Earth's Grocery Store, and the Rachel Incident, all 3 went forward to the next round. So I feel a little proud of myself. I feel a little like pumped up by this. There were other judges too, so obviously it's not just my vote that factors into this, but I really did find that to be affirming to my reading taste and to my ability to discern whether a book is really going to connect with other readers and is really tremendous. And these books were all very tremendous in their own way. There was just one of them that just didn't really quite hit the mark for me. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're judging the BookTube Prize for the next round, do let me know. I would be curious about that. I know you can't tell me a whole lot. Just let me know that you're judging. I know a couple of you had said you were going to sit out this round, and then maybe we're going to pull in at the end because he was looking for some additional judges. But I would really encourage you to subscribe to the BookTube Prize channel just to watch what occurs and which book ends up being the top of the list. A couple of the nonfiction books I was really rooting for didn't make it, but a couple of the other fiction books that I'm really excited about are in the next round, the semifinals, so I might pick those up in the next couple of months myself in sort of anticipation of watching that final winner. Thank you so very, very much. I appreciate you being patient for this wrap up, and as always, happy reading. Bye.